of Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew and Christian scriptures, there are two cities that have become infamous for their sin that sparked God's wrath. This text has devastatingly been misinterpreted time and time again to spread the idea that God's wrath was sparked by sexual sin, specifically homosexuality. And this interpretation of the text is easily debunked by scholars across the theological spectrum, and an extremely small number of scholars would argue that God's wrath was sparked by gay people in Sodom and Gomorrah. So let's spend a little bit of time exploring what this text is actually about. The text in question, Genesis chapter 19, begins with two angels approaching the city. I'll read verses 1 through 5 directly from the New International Version. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. "My lords," he said, "please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning." "No," they answered, "we will spend the night in the square." But he insisted so strongly that they did go with him and entered his house. He prepared a meal for them, baking bread without yeast, and they ate. Before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them." Now Lot shows overwhelming hospitality to the angels, but the people of the city, on the other hand, show absolute disdain for the visitors. So much so that they demand Lot bring the two men out so they can collectively rape them. All of the men of the city, young and old, it says. Here's the thing. Their motivation in doing this isn't because they're attracted to the men and want to sleep with them. Rather, this was a common practice in that time and place to shame someone and assert dominance over them. The text makes it a little more clear as Lot seeks to stop the men from trying to rape his two visitors. Now, how Lot tries to go about this is horrifying in its own right. We'll leave that for another video, another time. For right now, though, let's jump to what the men say in response to Lot after he attempts to convince them to back down. In verse 9, the men say, "Get out of our way. This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We will treat you worse than them." They explicitly bring up that Lot is also a foreigner, and that they will assert their dominance over him and shame him as well once they're done with his two visitors. This story of these men is meant to evoke profound discomfort and outrage from its readers, and to help the readers understand why God is angry at the people of the city. You can see how at face value some preachers have misinterpreted this text as having to do with gay sex. And thankfully this one doesn't take too much interpretive discussion to get to the bottom of, because frankly one of the Hebrew prophets, Ezekiel, later reflects upon the story of Sodom. And Ezekiel breaks it down for us in his writings. So here's what Ezekiel says. "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy." It couldn't get much clearer than that. From the prophet Ezekiel's perspective, it was the apathy and the arrogance of those in Sodom that made God angry. And that commentary, it really sheds light on what was going on within the story with the angels and Lot. The people of Sodom were arrogant. They thought they were better than foreigners. They wanted them out. They wanted to assert dominance and power over them. And this assertion of dominance was commonly done by shaming people through the act of rape. Now, whether you're conservative or progressive, I think we can all agree that rape is a heinous thing to do. And this brings up a whole load of questions, though, that I think we need to really sit with. Why is it that many of us have chosen to interpret this passage to condemn gay people rather than those who hate foreigners or don't care for the poor and needy, as Ezekiel brings up? Is it possible that it's easier to excuse our own apathy if we can point towards some other group of people to condemn instead? Because if God desperately wants us to take care of the poor and needy, then that asks us to take a hard look at our entire lives. It demands we reorient how we operate in order for everyone to have enough money and possessions. And instead, we have strangely enough chosen to mistreat gay people instead, based on this passage. In fact, there are many Christian parents who think they are doing God's work by turning their back on their children when they come out of the closet. My friends, this is the opposite of what God calls us to do. As the prophet Ezekiel reflects upon this story in Genesis 19, his invitation is to take care of the vulnerable. Yet we have somehow misinterpreted this story in such a way that we actually demonize the vulnerable instead. Many Christians have continuously chosen the path of apathy and arrogance toward the LGBTQ plus community. And it's time we seek to right this wrong. It's time we take the path of empathy and humility that Ezekiel and all the other prophets, including Jesus, call us to take.